September 30th, 2025, 6:13 p.m. Victor Tony Jones said only 2 words, "No, sir." But 35 years earlier, Jacob Nestor, bleeding from a stab wound piercing his heart, fought for 20 minutes to save his wife, firing 5 shots at his attacker with his dying breath. One man's silence, another man's desperate last stand. Between these 2 moments lies a story of violence, justice, and a question America still can't answer. When does punishment become redemption? September 2025 wasn't just another month in America's death chambers. It was a breaking point. 4 executions in 30 days, 3 different states, 2 methods. One of them so controversial that critics call it state-sanctioned torture. Florida shattered its own record with 13 executions in a single year. The previous record? 8. Set back in 2014. Texas carried out its 5th execution of the year. Alabama used nitrogen gas for the 6th time in history. By the end of September, the United States had executed 33 people, surpassing the entire year of 2024. But the numbers only tell part of the story. What they reveal about us, our capacity for violence, our ideas of justice, our willingness to forgive, or our refusal to. If you knew you had 24 hours to live, what would your last words be? Could you forgive someone who murdered your mother in cold blood? Has violence ever touched your community? We live in a society that says, an eye for an eye. But when the victim's family says, spare his life, who gets justice? We compensate people for state abuse, then execute them for crimes that abuse may have caused. Is that justice or hypocrisy? Before we go further, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. You're about to join thousands of subscribers who believe in understanding the full truth behind headlines. If you want investigations that don't shy away from complexity, that show you the victims, the perpetrators, and the families caught between, hit that subscribe button. While you were scrolling social media during September 2025, 4 men took their last breaths. But years before, sometimes decades, their victims took their last breaths too. Mothers, fathers, a baby who never got to say her second word. And somewhere in between, families have been living in a prison of grief. Waiting. Always waiting. Let's start with the case that set the record. Florida's 12th execution of 2025. A man who spent 34 years on death row for a crime that took only minutes. A bitter divorce that ended with 3 people dead and a house in flames. Clarence and Barbara Knowles lived in Mulberry, Florida. They had 2 daughters, Marie and Bonnie. They were ordinary people. Nothing about them suggested they'd become victims of calculated murder. Marie Knowles married David Joseph Pittman. By October 1989, Marie filed for divorce. Pittman made his intentions clear. If she went through with the divorce, he would harm them. These weren't vague threats. They were specific. They were repeated. 5 years earlier, Pittman had been accused of raping Bonnie, Marie's younger sister. The statute of limitations had expired. Bonnie never got full justice. Everyone knew Pittman was dangerous. But knowing someone is dangerous and stopping them are 2 different things. How many times do we hear threats and think, he'd never actually do it? May 14th, 1990. Pittman had been released from prison. He'd learned that Bonnie had attempted to press criminal charges against him. His rage intensified. And this time, his plan would succeed. He didn't stumble into murder. He planned it. Before he ever knocked on Bonnie's window, Pittman circled the house in darkness and cut the telephone line. He arrived in the early morning hours when the family would be asleep. He brought a knife. He had an escape plan. When Pittman tapped on Bonnie's bedroom window around 2 in the morning, she recognized him. She'd known him for years, so when he asked to talk, she let him in. Bonnie Knowles, 21 years old, made a choice to trust someone she knew, a choice that would cost her everything. Once inside, Pittman tried to proposition her sexually. Bonnie refused. Her rejection enraged him. When she screamed for help, he slit her throat and stabbed her multiple times. Barbara heard her daughter and came running. Pittman stabbed her 3 times. Clarence tried to reach the telephone. Pittman knocked him down and stabbed him 5 times. 3 people dead in minutes. But Pittman wasn't finished. He retrieved gasoline, poured it over Bonnie's bed, placed a tire underneath to intensify the flames, and set the house on fire. He stole Bonnie's Toyota and drove away, later returning to watch police discover the burning vehicle from a distance. The investigation was solid. Witnesses identified Pittman. Fearing police would connect him, Pittman turned himself in the next day. He maintained his innocence. The trial began March 18, 1991. On March 25th, the jury found him guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, premeditated arson, and grand theft. He was sentenced to death. His defense presented evidence of intellectual disability, his IQ tested around 70, and childhood abuse. The jury still recommended death. 34 years. That's how long the Knowles family waited. Over those decades, Pittman filed appeal after appeal claiming intellectual disability, prosecutorial misconduct, and due process violations. Every appeal was denied. September 17, 2025. Florida State Prison. Pittman's last meal consisted of fried chicken, steak, biscuits, chocolate, and soda. At 6 o'clock, he was escorted into the execution chamber. Before the drugs were administered, Pittman spoke. "I know all of you came here to watch an innocent man be killed by the state of Florida. I am innocent. I didn't kill anyone, that's all." At 6:12 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Among those watching was Marie, his ex-wife, the daughter and sister of the 3 people he murdered. She carried that trauma for 35 years. Did it bring her peace? Could anything? Here's what we need to understand. Domestic violence doesn't exist in isolation. It escalates. It gives warnings. Every day in America, roughly 3 women are murdered by their intimate partners. Will anyone listen? As Florida prepared for its 12th execution, Texas was moving forward with a case so disturbing that even the medical examiner said it was the worst he'd ever witnessed. A case involving a victim who couldn't defend herself, couldn't fight back, and couldn't even understand what was happening to her. Her name was Amora. She was 13 months old, 23 pounds, just learning to walk. That's Amora Bain Carson. Her first word was, Daddy, not to her biological father, but to Blaine Milam, her mother's boyfriend, the man who would torture her for 30 hours straight. At 13 months, babies are completely dependent on the adults in their lives. Amora's life could have been anything. All of that, every single possibility, erased over 30 hours in December 2008. She called him Daddy. She trusted him completely. That's the purest form of betrayal imaginable. Blaine Keith Milam and Jessica Bain Carson, both 18 years old, living in a trailer in Rusk County, Texas. Milam had only completed 4th grade. He was a registered sex offender. On December 2, 2008, Milam had methamphetamine in his system, 10 times the therapeutic dose. They believed, or claimed to believe, that a 13-month-old baby was possessed by demons. Before we continue, I need to warn you. What I'm about to describe is deeply disturbing. But I'm going to tell you what happened to Amora, because her story deserves to be told. The medical examiner, Dr. Keith Pinkard, had worked in forensics for 30 years. When he examined Amora's body, he said, "It's the worst thing I've seen in 30 years of law enforcement." 24 human bite marks covering her entire body, multiple skull fractures, 18 rib fractures, both arms broken, both legs broken, bleeding under her scalp, a lacerated liver, a bleeding blood vessel in her neck consistent with strangulation, evidence of sexual assault. The pathologist couldn't determine a single cause of death. Amora had so many potentially fatal injuries. This didn't happen in moments. Prosecutors presented evidence that Amora's torture lasted approximately 30 hours. For 30 hours, a 13-month-old baby endured pain most of us can't comprehend. Milam and Carson claimed Amora was possessed by demons, and they were trying to save her soul. A 13-month-old baby, barely verbal, accused of lying to God. This wasn't an exorcism. This was torture. This was murder. December 2, 2008, around 10:30. Milam called 911. His voice was calm.
16 hours, 48 minutes, 15 seconds.
Rescue 911.
Yes. My name's Blaine Milam, and my daughter, I just found her dead.
How old's your daughter?
13 months.
13 months old? Okay, let me connect you with the ambulance service, okay?
Responders arrived to find a child in rigor mortis, dead for hours. While this was happening, you were probably living your life. Maybe you were holiday shopping. Life was normal for you. For Amora, life was hell. And then it was over. The investigation moved quickly. Blood evidence covered the trailer. Days after the murder, Milam's sister told their aunt that Milam instructed her to remove evidence from underneath the trailer. Police found a pipe wrench with traces of lubricant, the same lubricant found on Amora's diaper. This was the murder weapon. Milam also confessed to a jail nurse. "I'm going to confess, I did it. But Ms. Shirley, the Blaine you know, did not do this." Notice what he's doing. He's confessing, but distancing himself from the act. On June 11, 2010, Blaine Keith Milam was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death. Jessica Carson received life in prison without parole. The jury decided she bore responsibility for failing to protect her child. I need to pause here. I know this is hard to hear. In the comments, let me know. How do we process cases like this? If you appreciate that this channel doesn't shy away from hard truths, hit that subscribe button. Milam's defense presented evidence of intellectual disability. IQ scores of 68 and 71. He read at an 8th grade level. Courts ultimately ruled him mentally competent for execution. After 15 years on death row, his time had run out. September 25, 2025. The same day Alabama was executing Geoffrey West. Texas gave Milam a special last meal: cheeseburger, baked fries, green beans, pinto beans, scrambled eggs, sausage burger, pears, cookies, tea, and water. At 6:19 p.m., lethal injection began. His final words: "If any of you wish to see me again, I implore you all to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and we will meet again. I love you all. Take me home, Jesus." No apology to Amora. No acknowledgement of what he'd done. Witnesses reported that Milam moved backward and complained for approximately 15 minutes. At 6:40 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Some might say those 15 minutes were nothing compared to 30 hours of torture. Where do you stand? Here's what haunts me. Amora's first word was "Daddy." We don't know what her second word would have been. We'll never know. Every time you hear a baby laugh, remember Amora. She never got to do those things. From the most vulnerable victim imaginable, we turn to a case with an unexpected twist. Because while Milam's execution was happening, Alabama was carrying out its own controversial execution. But this case involves something rare. The victim's son begging for the killer's life to be spared. His name is Will Berry, and his story of forgiveness will challenge everything you think you know about justice. March 27, 1997. Margaret Parrish Berry was 33 years old, mother of 2 young boys, one just 11 years old. She'd only been working at the Herald Chevron gas station for a few days. It was minimum wage, late hours, nothing dangerous, or so she thought. Geoffrey Todd West knew the store well. He'd worked there before, and he'd told people his plan: rob the store, leave no witnesses. This wasn't impulsive. West told multiple people he intended to kill whoever he found there. $250. That's what Margaret Berry's life was worth. West entered with his 17-year-old girlfriend, Amy Pierce. He forced Margaret to hand over the money. She complied. Then he forced her to lie face down on the floor and shot her in the back of the head. The shot caused nearly instantaneous death. She'd given him the money. The crime was over. But he'd said, leave no witnesses, so he left a body. Margaret went to work, thinking she'd come home. She probably kissed her boys goodbye. Maybe she said, "I love you." She had no idea those would be her last words to them. West's trial began June 1st, 1999. The court ordered West to wear an electric shock belt throughout his trial, capable of delivering shocks of over 50,000 volts. They tested it in front of the jury. Defense attorneys condemned this as inherently prejudicial. West's attorneys presented no witnesses on his behalf, no mitigating evidence. West was found guilty of capital murder. The jury voted 10-2 for death. Judge William Cardwell sentenced West to death, noting the murder was clearly deliberate and intentional, executed in an execution-style manner. Geoffrey Todd West spent more than 26 years on death row. In interviews, he expressed remorse. "Not a day goes by that I don't wish I could change what I did." His words would become important to one person, Will Berry. In 2018, Alabama gave inmates a choice: lethal injection or nitrogen hypoxia. West chose nitrogen hypoxia, a method that hadn't been developed yet. Alabama became the first government to execute someone using nitrogen hypoxia in January 2024. Witnesses described the condemned convulsing violently, gasping for air. It was widely condemned as torture. Will Berry was 11 when his mother was murdered. He grew up without her. No mother at his graduations. No mother at his wedding. Every milestone marked by her absence. For years, Will carried anger. But somewhere along the way, Will's perspective changed. He found faith. In the months before West's execution, Will Berry did something remarkable. He publicly declared that he forgave Geoffrey West. He wrote letters to Governor Kay Ivey asking for clemency. He participated in vigils. He requested West's sentence be commuted. "Executing Geoffrey West won't bring back my mother. It will only add one more death to this tragedy. I forgive him." Governor Ivey's office responded, "Alabama law mandates the death penalty for the most egregious forms of murder." Translation: the state doesn't care if the victim's son forgives. This raises a question that should make us uncomfortable. Who is execution for? If it's for the victim's families, if it's for closure, then why execute when the victim's family says don't? Will Berry said executing West would increase his pain. But the state executed West anyway. Will Berry chose forgiveness. He chose compassion. He chose to break the cycle of violence. And society ignored him and killed West anyway. September 25, 2025. West received visits from 8 family members. Alabama gave him $20 for a last meal. West chose chicken quesadillas. Before his death, West released a statement. "I privately apologize to the family of Margaret Parrish Berry, and I am honored by the forgiveness given to me by her son Will. I was baptized in the Catholic Church earlier this year, and I am at peace." At 5:56 p.m., execution began. West was strapped to a gurney with a clear gas mask covering his face. When asked for final words, West replied, "No, sir." But he gave a thumbs up to his attorney, a silent goodbye. The nitrogen gas began flowing. Alabama officials claimed unconsciousness would occur within seconds, but witnesses told a different story. West kept his eyes open. He swallowed hard repeatedly. His head rocked side to side. He appeared to foam at the mouth. At 6:22 p.m., 26 minutes after execution began, he was pronounced dead. If you take nothing else from Geoffrey West's case, take this. Forgiveness is possible even in circumstances that seem unforgivable. Will Berry proved that. The question isn't whether Geoffrey West deserved forgiveness. The question is, if a man who lost his mother can forgive, why does the state insist on revenge? Perhaps justice and vengeance are not the same thing. West's execution was Alabama's 6th use of nitrogen hypoxia. But it wasn't the last execution of September. 5 days later, Florida prepared to carry out its 13th execution of the year. And this case exposed a hypocrisy so profound, it should shake anyone's faith in the justice system. Because Florida was about to execute a man it had tortured as a child. A man it had formally recognized as a victim of state abuse just months before. A man it had compensated for that abuse. His name was Victor Tony Jones. Jacob and Matilda Nestor. Their story matters just as much as Victor Jones's story. They were Jewish immigrants who came to Miami from Brooklyn, chasing the American dream. Jacob was a World War II veteran, an inventor with 17 registered patents. Matilda was his high school sweetheart. They'd been together for decades. They had 2 children, Michael Nestor, who would become a hero during the September 11th attacks, saving lives, and Irene Fisher, who would witness Jones's execution 35 years later. The Nestors hired people others wouldn't. People in vulnerable situations. People just out of prison. They believed in giving people opportunities. December 1990. Victor Tony Jones walked into Nestor Engineering looking for work. The Nestors hired him on the spot. December 18th was his first day. December 19th was his second day, and his last. The Nestors' generosity, their fundamental belief in human redemption, is what got them killed. They died because they were kind. Before we talk about what Victor Jones did, we need to talk about what was done to Victor Jones. Victor was born into poverty. His mother abandoned him. During his adolescence, the state of Florida sent Victor to the Florida School for Boys in Okeechobee, now infamous as a house of horrors. Victor was physically tortured there, beaten with leather straps, sexually abused. He spent weeks in solitary confinement. He developed PTSD, suicidal thoughts, and auditory hallucinations. In 2024, Florida formally acknowledged the systematic abuse at these schools. They established a $20 million fund to compensate survivors. January 2025, just 8 months before Jones's execution, the Florida Attorney General sent Victor Jones a letter formally recognizing him as a survivor of abuse. The state deposited compensation into his prison account. Read that again. In January 2025, Florida acknowledged it had tortured Victor Jones as a child. It apologized. It paid him. And then, in September 2025, it killed him. With one hand, Florida writes an apology check. With the other, it signs a death warrant. How do we reconcile that? Acknowledging that Jones was a victim doesn't erase what he did. Trauma explains. It doesn't excuse. Jones made terrible choices. Those choices destroyed 2 lives. But we have to ask, how much did that childhood abuse contribute to the man he became? December 19th, 1990, day 2 of Victor Jones's employment. Jones came to rob the Nestors. As Matilda walked to the bathroom, Jones stabbed her at the base of her neck. The knife severed her aorta. She began bleeding massively. This wound was fatal. Jacob heard his wife in distress. He ran toward the bathroom. Jones stabbed him directly in the chest, piercing his heart. A wound that should have killed him instantly. But Jacob Nestor was a World War II veteran. He wasn't going down without a fight. For approximately 20 to 25 minutes, Jacob Nestor fought for his life and his wife's life. He retreated to his office despite the mortal chest wound. He found his .22 caliber pistol. He took aim despite fading consciousness. He fired 5 shots at Victor Jones. 1 bullet struck Jones in the forehead, a shot that should have been instantly fatal. That bullet didn't kill Jones. Against all medical probability, he survived. But Jacob didn't. Neither did Matilda. Think about Jacob's last moments. He was dying. He knew it. But he fought anyway. Not for himself. His wound was fatal. He fought to stop the man who'd hurt his wife. That's love. That's courage. That's heroism. Police arrived to find Jacob sitting on the sofa, dead, with Matilda's purse in his lap. Victor Jones was slumped on another sofa, conscious but gravely wounded. Cash, keys, and personal belongings of both victims were in Jones's pockets. Rushed to the hospital, Jones confessed he'd killed the couple because they owed him money. No one believed this. The Nestors were known for generosity. This was clearly a robbery. February 1st, 1993. Guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of armed robbery. The jury recommended death. March 1st, 1993. Formal death sentence imposed. Over the next 3 decades, Jones filed numerous appeals. His attorneys tried to present his reform school abuse as mitigation. In 1993, that evidence wasn't recognized. The courts dismissed it. Michael Nestor carried the pain of their murder for 30 years. He channeled that pain into service. September 11, 2001. Michael became a hero during the attacks. He saved lives during the World Trade Center collapse. In 2020, Michael died of brain cancer believed related to toxic exposure at Ground Zero. He never got to see Victor Jones executed. Michael's sister Irene, now 76, had lived with this for 35 years. In a remarkable echo of Will Barry's story, Irene Fisher publicly stated before the execution, "Yes, I forgive him. I forgive him because it is the right thing to do." I want you to pause and think. Victor Jones was both a victim and a perpetrator. The Nestors were generous people whose kindness got them killed. The state tortured Jones as a child, then killed him as an adult. How do we make sense of all this? Drop a comment. If you appreciate content that doesn't give you easy answers, that makes you think, subscribe. Hit the bell. These conversations matter. September 30th, 2025. Florida prepared for its 13th execution of the year. Jones woke at 4:30 a.m. He met with a spiritual advisor. Last meal, fried chicken, collard greens, and sweet tea. At 6:00 p.m., execution protocol began. When asked for final words, "No, sir." Just like Geoffrey West. No statement, just silence. 6:13 p.m. Victor Tony Jones, 64 years old, was dead. While Jones was being executed, about 60 protesters gathered across from the prison. At 6:00 p.m., they formed a line. Each person hit a bell with a hammer shouting, "It's not in my name." Father Phil Aguito said, "This cycle of violence has to stop." Maria de Liberato said, "None of us are going to wake up tomorrow and be safer because Victor Tony Jones is dead." So let's review what happened. The 1970s. Florida sends Jones to reform school. The 1970s. Florida tortures Jones at that reform school. 1990. Jones, damaged by that abuse, commits robbery and double murder. 1993. Florida sentences Jones to death. 2024. Florida acknowledges the abuse. January 2025. Florida formally recognizes Jones as abuse survivor. January 2025. Florida pays Jones compensation. September 2025. Florida executes Jones. The state tortured him. The state created the trauma that likely contributed to his violent behavior. The state acknowledged that. The state paid for that. And then the state killed him anyway. How do we reconcile that? How do we hold both truths? That Jones deserved accountability for murdering the Nestors, and that Florida bears some responsibility for creating the person who committed that murder. If there's a lesson in Victor Jones's case, it's this. Systems create victims, and sometimes victims create more victims. It's a cycle. Florida's abuse of children at reform schools created trauma that rippled forward in time. That trauma doesn't excuse Jones's choices, but it does implicate the state in a way that should make us deeply uncomfortable. Jacob and Matilda Nestor deserved better. They deserved to live. They deserved to be safe. But Victor Jones also deserved better. He deserved a childhood free from torture. And we deserve a justice system that doesn't create the very problems it then claims to solve. Every time we ignore abuse in institutions, prisons, schools, foster care, we plant seeds. Those seeds grow into pain. And sometimes, that pain erupts into violence. Victor Jones's case is a mirror, and what it reflects back at us isn't pretty. 4 men executed. 3 states participated. 2 execution methods used. 104 years combined time on death row. 6 direct victims murdered, different responses from victims' families. Marie Pittman witnessed execution, seeking closure through death. Will Barry opposed execution, seeking closure through forgiveness. Irene Fisher attended execution but forgave Jones. There's no consistent answer to whether execution brings closure, because grief doesn't work that way. 2 cases involved controversial execution methods. West's nitrogen hypoxia, 26 minutes to death. Milam's lethal injection, 15 minutes of movement. If we're going to execute people, shouldn't we at least do it humanely? But we can't even agree on what humane means. Does execution provide closure? Can the state execute people it victimized? Is forgiveness possible for the unforgivable? What about victims who can't speak? Baby Amora will never tell us what she thinks about justice. Does childhood trauma matter? Are we safer because these men are dead? Who is the death penalty for? If it's for victims' families, why execute against their wishes? At what point does the death penalty become murder by the state? If you've made it this far, you've spent over 30 minutes exploring these cases with me. Thank you. These stories aren't easy, but they're important. Now I want to hear from you, in the comments. Which case affected you most and why? Has your perspective on the death penalty changed? What do you think about the Victor Jones case? Can a victim of the state become a perpetrator accountable for execution? Should intellectual disability be a barrier to execution? There are no wrong answers. Let's have a respectful conversation. If this kind of investigation is valuable to you, if you want content that doesn't shy away from complexity, subscribe to Dark Justice Files. Hit that notification bell because we're not done with 2025's executions. October 2025 is coming. It's going to be the busiest month in America's death chambers in over a decade. 7 executions scheduled. 5 of those will happen in just 4 days. October 13th through 16. 5 people, 4 days. Florida will carry out its 14th and 15th executions. We're going to cover every single one, because these stories matter. These lives matter. Both the victims and the perpetrators. We're going to keep asking the uncomfortable questions. This channel is committed to showing you the full truth. Not just what happened, but why it happened. Not just the crime, but the context. Not just the execution, but the implications. Because true crime isn't entertainment. It's education. It's awareness. It's understanding the darkest parts of humanity so we can build something better. September 2025 is over. 4 men are dead. But the questions they left behind? Those are just beginning. Stay with us. Keep thinking. Keep questioning. Keep caring about justice, mercy, and what it means to be human. Until next time, this is Dark Justice Files, where we don't just tell the story, we ask what it means.